Well, thank you, President Hennessy, and thank you to all of you for being here today. The topics that we want to engage in are extremely important for not just our country, but for the world. And I know that Greg and I are very much looking forward to engaging in a dialogue with you, so that we hope that what our remarks will do is to really kick things off and encourage you to think about the key issues, key questions on your mind, because many or all of you are going to play a role in leadership and helping to shape the kind of environment that will lead to a greater level of food security and better prosperity through agricultural development. As I was sitting here and listening to President Hennessy and then looking out, seeing Hoover Tower and the quad, I was reminded of my first trip to Stanford. I don't know, how many of you would have come up Palm Drive as you were coming to the campus today? Well, as John mentioned, I grew up in Nebraska. My family are farmers. I visited in the winter, I guess it was Christmas holiday of my senior year in high school. And just to show you my decision-making prowess, as my mom and I drove up Palm Drive in that setting, it was about 10 below zero in Nebraska. It was about 70 degrees here, and we got to that first intersection on Palm Drive, and I turned to my mom and I said, I think I want to go here. So I said no to UC Davis and yes to Stanford, and I couldn't have been more pleased with the opportunity. As I was in Stanford, I continued, or attending classes here, I continued to enjoy my connection to our family roots. We've been farming in Nebraska since 1854. We've been in the same location from 1900. And a lot of my Stanford classmates, you know, probably Pat included, would have really amazing jobs during the summer. You know, maybe they were working computer companies or something like that. But what I was doing was I was going back to Nebraska and working on the farm. And so this is a picture from in between my sophomore and junior year in high school, or I mean in college, and I was back working at the farm, and we had some Australian farmers who were visiting. And that was one of the things that was very special about my father, is he invited people involved in agriculture from all over the world to come to our farm. And so at a very early age, I had the opportunity to meet people from around the world who were involved in farming and understanding their thoughts about agriculture in their country, and it really gave me a sense of pride in what we did and what farmers did all around the world. And so here I am showing off an ear of our corn to the Australian farmers in my favorite John Deere shirt. I really love that John Deere shirt. And I was very sad when that John Deere shirt no longer fit. And it wasn't because the shirt shrunk. So I've always been very connected to the work that we do at the foundation with small farmers because of my own agricultural background. We have what many of you would think is a relatively large farm, but we are family farmers. And that's just the difference in scale in today's agriculture. When my father started on our farm in 1932, we had about 240 acres, and it was just, of course, like then, it was just our family who was leading that farming operation. And my first foundation trip to Africa, I had the opportunity to be in Kenya, and it was a great introduction for me to see what was happening in agriculture in other parts of the world, and in particular for smallholder farmers in Africa. I went to the site of a project that was funded by the Gates Foundation, led by Heifer International with TechnoServe. And at the center of this project was a dairy chilling plant. And it gave me a great opportunity to see the approach of investing across the agricultural value chain. This particular project involved science and technology, better livestock technology, it involved better farm management practices, it involved market access. I love the concept. The concept was that by having this dairy chilling plant that ultimately is farmer-owned. What you can do is you can provide a predictable price to the farmer to sell their milk. And this is a big problem for them. The way it worked previously is that maybe or maybe not a hawker would come by. A hawker is a guy who drives around on a motorcycle and may or may not buy your milk. So there was no predictable market access for these farmers. Because now with the dairy chilling plant, they had predictable market access, they had a predictable price, that gave them the courage to invest in better technology, better dairy cattle. There was artificial insemination service that was provided by the dairy chilling plant. And in addition, the plant also provided extension services so that the farmers could learn how to better handle their fodder, the feed for the cattle, so that they could get a more predictable amount of milk from the cattle, a higher amount of milk from the cattle on an ongoing basis. So I love the concept. I love the concept. I also love the numbers. In just 2 or 3 years, there were now 3,000 farmers in a 25-kilometer radius that were able to access this dairy chilling plant and be able to sell their milk. And so I loved it. I loved the numbers, I loved the concept. And you know, there's this old saying about, you know, the stories behind the numbers. But that day, I also really learned the importance of the story in front of the numbers. Because I went to a small farmer, a farm couple named David and Lucy. And David and Lucy farm about 4 acres. That's the size of their farm. They're supporting their kids, they're supporting each of their parents, and so you're talking about 8 people being supported on 4 acres. And so it was really fascinating to talk to David and Lucy and really understand how they were able to do this. And in one part of the conversation, I said to David what was his aspiration for the next part of the next phase of the farm. He said they wanted to rebuild their herd to 3 cattle. They showed me the 1 cow that they had. I said, what do you mean rebuild? And they said, because of the predictable income from the dairy chilling plant, what they had decided to do was to sell 2 of their cattle to help finance the college degree of their oldest daughter in hotel management in Nairobi. And that's the story in front of the numbers. And I've now had the opportunity myself to see dozens of these stories and to hear about these projects in scale that are making this possible for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of farmers around the world. So I wanted to start out by clearly putting in your mind the stories in front of the numbers. And very consistently, whether it's cocoa farmers, or if I'm talking to coffee farmers in Uganda, very consistently, what I hear is when they are able to improve their incomes, the first thing they do with the money is to invest it in the education of their children. So I think what you can see is the ripple effect that is created by this. And so I wanted to start there. I really wanted to put that picture into your mind before I delve into the details of our agricultural work. I want to talk a little bit more generally about the Gates Foundation. What are our goals and how do we hope to achieve them? When Bill and Melinda created the Gates Foundation, they had a principle that all lives have equal value. Yet, as they travel around the world, we can clearly see that that's not how the world operates. There are significant inequities. And so the Gates Foundation starts with the principle of how can we invest our resources, whether that be financial, intellectual, other types of resources, how can we invest in ways that will really help all people to have the chance to live a healthy and productive life. And of course, since we are somewhat, from the computer industry, somewhat numbers-oriented, somewhat data-oriented, we're always thinking about leverage. Where can we get the greatest amount of leverage for our investments? And so we think in that way. We also think about the fact that the marketplace that made Microsoft so successful doesn't respond to the needs of poor Bill, if you hear him talk about these issues, you'll often hear Bill talk about market failures. We're big believers in the market system, but there are obviously cases where there is not a market opportunity that causes the investment or encourages the investment that can really make a difference for people. So we look at those opportunities or those market failures as opportunities to guide our investments. Another thing that comes from our background in the high technology industry is our belief in innovation. Because of our belief in innovation, even though you can look at this world, the developing world, the poor people, their circumstances, and be somewhat shocked, we have optimism. We have optimism that science and technology and system approaches and other innovations can really make a difference. But again, the benefits of innovation don't always accrue to poor people. But we think that the tools are available to help address many of these critical problems, and I want to explain that a little more clearly. What I'm leading up to by talking about market failures as an opportunity, by talking about technology and science as a foundation for innovation, what I'm talking about, or what I'm leading up to, is the idea that we have the opportunity to be catalytic. And so I want to give you a sense of a three-legged stool. On one leg, you have the private sector, and we are big believers in capitalism. We think capitalism is an incredibly efficient approach to allocate resources in society in order to encourage goods and services that help raise the overall quality of life. That's a very, very important part of our world. And it is that profit motive in the private sector that encourages the risk-taking that leads to those advances. But of course, that gets back to this point about market opportunity. In order to have the profit, you have to have a market opportunity. Now, let me contrast that a little bit with the public sector. In the public sector, our tax dollars go toward goods and services, we hope, that help to raise the quality of life, whether it's education or other aspects that in democracy are believed to be important. But, of course, the public sector is less risk-oriented. I mean, after all, do you want the government taking a lot of risk with your tax dollars? So on the one hand, you have the private sector, which will take risk and create goods and services. The public sector is less oriented to taking risk, but how are we going to handle those market failures? And that's where I'm leading to the third leg of the stool, which is what we believe to be catalytic philanthropy. I distinguish that from operational philanthropy, which is very important, where philanthropy fills in the gaps in society. But in catalytic philanthropy, our opportunity and the sweet spot of where we want to be at the Gates Foundation is to identify where, with our investments, we can create an innovation, a new intervention that can really raise the quality of lives for people, determine and identify the evidence of that success, so that then that intervention can be scaled up and sustained by the private sector if we can show that there is a profit opportunity, or the public sector if we can show that this is a better way to improve the overall quality of society through the investment of public dollars. And so that is catalytic philanthropy. John mentioned that we are a large foundation. But in reality, the amount of money we invest each year is a very, very, very small percentage of the overall need. So the only way we can really have the kind of impact, the only way we can live up to this aspiration of trying to change people's lives so that they can all have a chance for a healthy, productive life, is to be very catalytic in our thinking. So I wanted to lay that out for you so you have an understanding of where we are coming from. I'll just quickly touch on our areas of focus so that I can put our agricultural work in context. I mentioned to you earlier that we look for those opportunities where we can have the greatest impact from our dollars invested. And clearly, Bill and Melinda early on saw the opportunity to take advantage of medicines in the developed world, like vaccines, and get them to the kids in the developing world. And so about 50% or so of our payout goes to global health, trying to reduce the infectious disease burden in the developing world, and in particular for poor children. About 25% of our payout goes in the U.S. program, and in particular goes to education, because we see that the biggest opportunity that we may have to provide a catalytic impact in our country is to improve the public education system, so that we have a higher number of kids who are graduating from high school, prepared to succeed in college or to succeed in their careers. And then about 20 to 25% of our payout goes towards global development. And this is something that really came along in the wake of Warren Buffett's commitment and his gift to the Gates Foundation. There are about 1.1 to 1.3 billion people in the world who live in extreme poverty. The definition of extreme poverty is quote-unquote $1 per day. About more than 1 billion people live in extreme poverty. 70 to 75% of those people live in rural areas. They're dependent on subsistence agriculture for their livelihoods, for their lives. And so that really helps to take me to my next topic, which is, why did we decide to get involved in agriculture? And it's this simple math, that 3/4 of the world's poorest people rely on farming for their food and income. Now, one of the things that you'll quickly see is that the poorest farmers in the world, these smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, aren't anywhere near achieving the potential. So here's a chart that shows rain-fed yields, so that simply means without irrigation, in the OECD countries, the rich world countries, in sub-Saharan Africa, and the world average. So this is a projection of potential yield based on what would be possible given soil types and other factors. But what's the actual yield? Well, you can see in the developed world, we're pretty close to the projection of potential. But you see where we are in sub-Saharan Africa. Let me just remind all of you that in sub-Saharan Africa, 95% of agriculture is rain-fed. There's very little irrigation. Now let's take another look. This look will be at irrigated yields. And I'm going to again start out with the potential yields based on soil types and factors. And you have the developing world, the developed world, the rich world, in the left-hand chart. You have South Asia, primarily India, Bangladesh, in the center. So you can see potential yield quite high. Let's look at the actual yield. So again, in the developed world and the rich world, we're very close to the potential. You can see the world average on the far right, and you can see where we are today in South Asia. Again, where in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where the significant majority of these smallholder farmers live in the world. So this gives you a sense of where we are in terms of the potential. Now, if the goal is to help the poor smallholder farmers exit and their families exit from extreme poverty so that you can increase the amount of food that they have to eat, so that you can increase their income. These two slides really help to illustrate the importance of agricultural development. The obvious conclusion is that if small farmers can increase their productivity, it will have a very huge impact on hunger and poverty. And we like to say that agriculture and prosperity grow together. But, of course, there are a lot of challenges, and I want to talk about some of the challenges. I'll mention climate change. The places that will suffer the most severe weather are the places where the poorest farmers live. Another big challenge is water scarcity. This is something that I've been very interested in as I go through the calculation of what's going to be required in terms of food production during the next 40 years or so. We're going to have nearly a doubling of food production to handle the world population in an environment where, due to climate change and other issues, water is going to be more scarce. So these, again, you see the mapping of water scarcity, and you can see how that maps to areas where you have poor smallholder farmers. I like to focus in on the idea of more crop per drop. This actually is a picture from my home state of Nebraska. This is Lake McConaughey. What you're seeing here is a boat ramp. That is a boat ramp. When I was growing up, my father talked about the Ogallala Aquifer. I think he said to me it was the second largest underground body of water in the world. He talked about the rich soils of Nebraska, the unlimited water resources that we had, and how, you know, agriculture in the Midwest could feed the world. That was my father's belief, and I loved his passion. Today I look at Lake McConaughey and I see what's happened to that water resource. Let me take you on a little trip around the world. This is a place called Jialing in China, and you can see what's happened to the riverbed in the site of this 30 million city. This is in Gujarat, where in India, where you're seeing incredibly low groundwater. And basic problem here are rivers are drying up, groundwater levels are dropping, and if we're going to be able to feed the world, we're going to have to figure out how to achieve more crop per drop. So climate change is a challenge, water scarcity is a challenge, the economic crisis is a challenge. It's putting pressure on budgets in both donor and development.